I guess we should actually start this time with introductions because you probably recognize most of the guys, but just a kind of quick run through who you are and what you are doing.
Hello, I'm Leif. It's really hard to pronounce if you're English. I'm from Vaadin, and should I say anything more? Thank you.
So these guys are from the GWT steering committee.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just checking. Hi, I'm Colin. I work at a company called Red Current, and I guess that's all we're saying. Do you want anything else? I like working with GWT.
I'm Ray Cromwell. I work at Google as an engineer.
Yeah, my name is Daniel Kurka, and I work at Google as an engineer.
Justin Hickman with Cincha.
Oh, thanks. I'm Stephen Haberman. I'm with LinkedIn these days. I've been doing GWT for a while. I've got the Tussle framework that is kind of my thing. And yeah.
Hey, I'm Christian Sadadek. I work for Red Hat, where I'm leading the RI effort, and I work on many other GWT-related projects.
My name is Julien Dramé. I'm working for Arbis.
My name is Christian Goudreau, and I'm co-founder and CEO of Arbis.
I'm Brendan, and I'm a Java developer at JetBrains and a developer advocate for IntelliJ IDEA.
So in a bit, we'll have 2 mics. Think your questions, what you want to ask from these guys, and then come up front to ask these. I have a couple of questions already lined up from the voting system, as well as I kind of came up with a couple of nasty ones by myself. So let's start with something easy. Should we kill widget in GWT 3?
No. I think that it probably
You were going to say that?
No, okay. Let me at least finish a little bit. I do agree that we probably should remove it from GWT user itself, but I don't think we should say it's a bad idea. I think that there's still going to be projects where it's going to make a lot of sense, and there is a ton of code out there. Anybody here use widget at all? Ever extend it once? Okay.
You're left behind.
Anybody used ArrayList?
What's that?
Never mind. So let me give you a little bit of a different perspective. I'm not saying delete widget. But as Joel and Bruce pointed out yesterday, the whole value and the whole idea behind widget was basically getting around memory leaks. And most of the modern browsers don't do this anymore. So we should probably move it aside to something called GWT Classic and get it out of the way for newer things.
I think I said that, but okay.
Is GWT Classic like 2.x or anybody else?
I think.
I mean, it could be like an add-on jar. Like, for example, if you think of GWT 3.0 as a modularized system where the compiler is broken out from the SDK and the GWT user jar, which is this monolithic thing that includes everything, is maybe separated into smaller dependencies where you can pick and choose what you want to use, then the widget system could be a separate like gwt-widget.jar that you can kind of like make your own, kind of like putting together a meal, right? A menu. Like you download GWT 3.0 and you still have widgets that you need to support. So you add the GWT widget jar in your class path, and you add the GWT compiler, and you add some other dependencies that it needs, and you've made yourself a version of GWT that still supports widgets. On the other hand, if there's somebody doing like Angular stuff or some other kind of thing with Polymer, and they don't care about that at all, they just kind of like add in the core emulation classes of Java, the GWT compiler, and like maybe Elemental or something, and they go from there. And so if we stop being in the business of producing like a giant SDK that includes everything all at once, then the question of deleting widgets is not really a question anymore, right? It's because you don't have to delete it. You can just always have it as a separate add-on.
I agree. I think that's been the dream for a long time, but it's just kind of really hard to actually make that happen.
I blame Thomas Breuer. He was actually modularizing GWT for a while.
Somebody needs to hire him.
Okay, speaking of GWT 3, I think some question that is in minds of many at the moment, when we actually can have GWT3, when can we use it, when it's released. And just to kind of set basis for this is that what I have heard, if I understood correctly, is that you guys from Google are using some of those features already in production, in inbox. So why not package this up and call it GWT3?
What's the question? Why not do that? Or, because there's two questions there.
No, yeah.
Because there's a good reason why not to go with GWT3 right away. And that's for those of us who can't, in one giant step, move away from all these different pieces. We need GWT 2.8 for the rest of us.
I basically, what I would say is the reason why we can't do that right now is because if you saw my JS interop talk, so the JS interop stuff is basically a big part of this, at least for our needs internally, like with Google Inbox. And last year at GWT.create, when we presented JS interop stuff, it was actually called JS Interface. And so as we were building things internally using this, we discovered shortcomings and things as we had to change. So the spec changed a lot. And so this year it's like at JS type and at JS export. And so I don't think it's production ready right now, and that's why we kind of split it into two pieces. So what we have taken is we've looked at the stuff that we're using in Inbox, that we've shipped to Inbox users essentially. And we're like, okay, that looks like we're going to keep that. That looks like it's stable. It looks like it works. And so we called that JS Interop Phase 1. And so the plan basically is like we'll package up what we know to work, and it's probably not going to change, and seems like it's the right abstraction. And we're going to put that in GWT 2.8. So you don't have to wait for 3.0 to get that. Then for the other stuff, which I showed, the Phase 2 stuff, which we think is very important to kind of remove the last bit of boilerplate and pain from interacting with both browser APIs and like external JavaScript APIs. That is, I think, expected likely to change. In fact, I know it will change. And so as we start implementing it, yes, there might be some apps internally at Google that will use it, but probably what we finally ship in GWT 3.0 won't even match what we internally were using, because that stuff will just be constantly refactored. And so I would not want to inflict on you guys like a half-baked spec, because the JS interop stuff is so fundamental that we should get it right the first time around, so that when you start using it, you're not stuck on it like you were with like Disney.
But wouldn't it be easier to get it right if you have more eyeballs on it?
Yes, but we are an open source project, so you can view so if you actually want to use the stuff as it's in progress, you can always get the nightly builds. And so those aren't GWT 3.0, those are something between 2.8 and 3.0. And so you can always, huh? Yeah, well, but the theory is that you should be able to download the nightly builds. Right now the nightly build, I think the build machines is stuck. And so, but once they start up again, you can always base yourself on the latest. But I get what you're saying, like, and we do need the external community to start using this stuff before it's finalized, because there are use cases that don't have anything to do with Google Inbox or the other projects internally that might be your use cases, and if we don't take those into consideration, we'll end up with something that doesn't satisfy your needs.
Just a second, Daniel. So, quick note, there are 2 mics. Please come ahead and ask questions, so go ahead.
So let me add that the actual specification is actually also openly available, so it's not something you can actually get involved and comment on. So if you're really interested in these kinds of things, please do comment and get involved on the contributors list.
And it's a pretty easy read. If you're at all interested, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, we got valuable feedback from people like Jens, for example, on the spec, and so like it would be helpful.
I don't know if it's part of the original question, but as far as like why not do a GWT 3, do some sort of release that we call GWT 3 now. Like to me, the reason the name GWT 3 is like a chance to break things, right? And I don't think we want to do that twice. In a row quickly. Oh, twice in a row quickly. Sorry, thanks. So I had said, if you didn't hear it, the GWT 3 is potentially, I don't think that's necessarily agreed on, that potentially a release that could be breaking, right?
Yeah,
you only get to do that once, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one very simple thing that could break you, even if we don't change any APIs at all, but if we split the jars up, right, and now there's a GWT widget jar, your builds are going to break because you have the wrong dependencies. And so, but that's like one example of breakage, and we probably would want to do many, many more. There are other things we just want to delete. There's some stuff we just want to delete that's been around since 2006. Did we delete event listeners? They're still in there. So remember we introduced the event handler system? The old event listener stuff's still there because there's still some people even inside Google that are using it. And we'd like to delete that. Why I have 2 event handling systems.
Don't delete these. We are using them. Hey, come on, people. Don't be shy. I mean, it's your chance to kind of challenge these guys with.
I mean, otherwise we're happy to get lost in the weeds here, but come on.
Hi, okay, so I'll start this off. A lot of talk already here about, getting rid of widgets. So if somebody were to ask you, what's your vision for the future of GWT? I mean, is GWT going to sort of go back to a core competency of being a Java to JavaScript compiler, and then we're going to have, Polymer and web components, whatever else, that people can tack on as they want? Like, what would you see as your vision for GWT? If we have the conference next year, what are we going to be talking about?
So let me try to fill that in. So first of all, you need to build these kinds of things from the ground up. So first of all, what you want to have a really fast compiler, and I think we've delivered on that over the last year. You also want to have a really good debugging experience. We delivered on that, but we can still improve over the next year. And we're kind of working on making bare metal APIs really easy in GWT. That is what JSInterop is all about. Once you have these kinds of things in place, you can kind of think about what's the next level of abstraction you can offer to people. And in my talk today about Singular, I'm offering one of these abstractions on top of that. While Singular doesn't technically require JSInterop, you could also make it work with Gisney, but it's much, much nicer if you can build it on top of JSInterop. And I think from the GWT team's perspective for now, we want to make sure that we build these ground-up pieces that everybody needs. A good DOM API based on JSInterop, a really good debugging experience, a really fast compiler experience, integration with Clojure, that we have these kinds of things covered. And maybe you want to add something.
I just wanted to take a step back, and I think you kind of nailed it in a way, in the sense that the wider web community basically has evolved a lot. And one of the frequent criticisms that we get of GWT basically is that it's fundamentally not its development experience is not it doesn't match the modern experience of web development. The way if you go to any site where you see people discussing web development, like on Reddit or Hacker News or Stack Exchange, their development experience is totally alien towards GWT. I mean. They program against raw browser APIs. They have templating solutions that are very dynamic. Their round-trip experience is very lightweight. And they're looking at GWT and they're saying, you have a slow compile. You've abstracted away the web, so you don't program against the actual web APIs a lot of times. So you hide it. And you have a lot of boilerplate. And so what we've been thinking about is let's first try to make GWT programming more like JavaScript programming, the JavaScript programming experience, meaning let's get that right first. So you have a fast development cycle, like hopefully less than like 100 milliseconds. You make a change, you hit reload, and basically you should see it immediately. Let's get that done. Let's get a good debugging experience, like Daniel said, and let's get all of the browser APIs there, not just a few that the GWT engineers happen to add to the SDK. Let's get all of them there so that whatever your app needs to do, it accomplish it easily. And then on top of that, basically, we can have a rich ecosystem. We can have React-like API SDKs. We can have Angular-like things added on. We can have Polymer-like things added on. And then it would be up to you to decide which programming model you want to choose, just like a JavaScript programmer today. If you're a JavaScript programmer today and you go out to develop, there's a rich menu of options. You can choose to be an Angular person. You can choose to be React. You can choose to be Knockout.js, and on and on and on. There's like 20, 30 Ember.js. There's like all these different frameworks. And each one of them has good things about it and bad things about it, and it depends on the application. But if you're a GWT developer today, it's kind of like widgets are the only game in town. You're kind of forced, basically. We kind of have told you the way to develop an application is you have widgets, you have UI binder, you have activities in places, and you have all this different stuff. And so you're kind of straitjacketed. And we kind of want to make it more of a layered approach where you can swap out the different pieces. So if you like widgets, then continue to use them. But the SDK should be architected in such a layered way that you can throw that stuff away and you can pick an Angular type solution if you want to. And I think that's basically what we're moving to in the future. We want to make it easy to include other development models.
Yeah, I think the only, like, everybody wants to do it now. It's just a matter of, well, we can't without breaking everybody, right? I mean, it's just a matter of how we get to there. But yeah, that's, I think there's pretty strong consensus that the less that is in core GWT, the better.
Let me add one small example to that. So removing CSS resource has been on our radar for now 2 years, because we really have a really old parser in there. But from a Google perspective, we could just upgrade everybody to a new parser and delete the old one. But that would leave you guys in a very weird state, because with the next GWT version, you need to get this migration all done in once before you can actually move to the next version. It would also mean that all the libraries out there that rely on this need to get upgraded first, and would create a huge churn of problems. So that's why we decided to do an intermediate release, something like 2.8, to encourage people to move over and give them a gradual migration. And that's kind of the approach we're leaning towards for GWT 3.0, having more intermediate steps so you guys don't have this really jump off the cliff experience to get into the new world.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to force people to cold turkey rewrite their application. And one of the nice things about his singular stuff, if you didn't actually notice this in the presentation, which is you can apply it to any like subtree of your web page. And so you could actually have like an application where like 80% of the stuff is widgets and like UI binder, and then in one particular part of the page you could just have a singular template. And so it's not all or nothing. And so I think that's a useful model going forward, is to try to have some migration path.
I remember going to one GWT conference. I guess that was the only GWT conference in 2007, 2008. And it was here in San Francisco, and it was much smaller than this one. But Bruce Johnson over there, he was asking the audience a question about, what do you guys think? Should we break things to make GWT better or not? And at that time, I was surprised to hear that the audience thought that it's better to break things we can change if the SDK is better after those changes or those breaks. So what do you guys think? Who wants rather have new stuff faster, even if we would have to kind of break things? Who wants to kind of keep the backwards compatibility?
Pretty impressive vote right there.
Nobody wants to kind of keep the current APIs.
Let's break everything all the times.
Yeah. Just asking.
Thank you, that's awesome.
So a variation on that. The mic's on.
So we kind of did the same poll yesterday, last year, and it was a completely different view. So over the course of 1 year, there's a radical change happening, and I really like that.
Maybe the other ones just left early, but
let's see actually how Europe goes and how the people react there. Maybe we just get kicked off stage.
So, sorry, the next question from here.
Yeah, I just definitely wanted to endorse the idea of breaking things apart and making it modular. I wanted to push back a little bit on the idea of chasing after Angular and these other things that seem to me hip and they look awesome, and you can, in half an hour, you can have this cool thing, but then 3 months later the pain starts. I think one thing GWT's core greatness is that there is some pain up front, but 6 months, a year, 2 years later, I feel like there's less pain than other things that I've tried. And so maybe not a little less of the chasing after what's cool right now, a little more. And to kind of carry on to that, with both of those ideas, it'd be great if there was more community involvement in making new modules, compound widgets, other pieces of API that we can contribute, and there's nothing stopping us from doing it right now, but it just hasn't happened, and I'm wondering if some leadership could make that happen.
I know you want to answer the Angular part of it, but I just wanted to, before you answer, I just wanted to say that one of the nice things about modularizing it is that we wouldn't really be dictating, the steering committee would not be dictating to people to use Singular or Angular, because it wouldn't actually be part of the SDK. It would just be one of many different options people had. They could, in terms of, just like today, you can add on GXP or you can add on Vaadin. This would just be a third-party it happens to be developed by someone at Google, but it could just be just another library that people can contribute to on GitHub, and it's not necessarily like an official thing that you must use. And so we're not going to drive you to use Angular, but I think he's going to answer you about the scaling problem. So I'll let him. But also contributing. I definitely think that we need to first break things into smaller pieces. And I think once we break them into smaller pieces, it's easier to get people to take responsibility for owning a small piece of something than a large piece of something. Like, for example, if I were to say to you, we need somebody to take care of Request Factory, you're going to say, oh man, that's like too big and too complicated. I don't want to have to deal with that. But if I were to tell you, we need somebody to maintain the GWT storage API, which is like a little tiny bit of code that is the browser local storage. It's a couple classes. You probably have no problem maintaining and accepting patches for small tweaks to that. And so I think as we make things smaller, it's easier for other people to get involved because they don't feel like it has to be their full-time job maintaining it, right? Unless we start paying people to maintain these things. Over to you.
You want to say me something about that?
So like Angular scaling up to be
so Angular scaling, I hope I made that pretty clear in my talk, that I think there's, for particular use cases, Angular might have problems, and that we don't want to do something where it's too easy to hang yourself, and hopefully Singular is not the project that won't scale to really big applications. So that's something that is supposed to scale.
Next one.
We'll see. The jury's still out.
Well, we'll see next year.
I'm just curious, as a steering committee, what do you think, looking back over the last year, what do you think what do you wish you would have been able to accomplish? And when we're here next year, what do you want to be able to say that, as a steering committee, you have accomplished?
I'll just start first. I wish we would have been able to ship Java 8 sooner. Like, I had many of the core patches to do it ready a long time ago. In fact, even before Java 8 was released. But other things had to be worked on, like Inbox, and so I didn't get around to doing that. But hopefully it's released very, very soon. So that's one of my regrets.
Well, it's not really like a thing the steering committee does, which I think maybe might have been what the question was. But I'd love to see that SDBG, I always think I'm going to get the order of those wrong, become really well supported in the next year. So I think it looks really awesome.
And aside from that part of the debugging story, I think, addressing the first half of the question, I think Super Dev Mode is a roaring success. I think it's clearly still got some work to do, but I think that, by any measurement of how we try to get our development time, it's an awesome success.
Do you think it's faster than the classic dev mode? Yeah, that amazes people, but it actually is.
Except for 40 megabyte JavaScript files loading into the browser, that sometimes chugs a little bit, but aside from that, everything else is so fast.
We're working on that part. And if you're using Chrome instead of Firefox, it actually loads faster.
Yeah, I'm using Chrome.
Yeah, I would also like to endorse that quickly, because last year, remember, we were in this situation, and we got many, many concerns, many, many questions about Super Dev Mode. And I think none of those concerns were, in the end, really that serious, because GWT 2.7 really works well. In all our tests, Super Dev Mode is actually faster than the old Dev Mode. And so our internal users are very happy with it. So I think I just wanted to emphasize that was really delivered on. But again, it's not really our steering committee work. It was really the GWT team that did that.
Actually, I think it would make sense to kind of give a round of applause for the GWT team because of the new Super Dev Mode, because it actually really, really works.
Well, I don't know if Brian is still here, but like Brian Slensky and John Stalcup, they should stand up if John's here, because they both they both pretty much worked on this full time for like a whole year to basically get it up to where it is today.
You could see it the other way around. It took them a whole year to ship it.
I actually say that I can't take that much credit for it, because from my perspective, last year I did a talk, and I think people were rather concerned. that was partially by design. I wanted the people to be concerned because it was kind of a big change. I wanted to make sure people know that, hey, this is happening. And I thought that it's really the community rallying. Most of the great stuff that went into 2.7 was not my idea. It was other people doing it. So I'm just glad to be able to oversee it and be able to see that that actually made it somewhere. So I would say, thanks to people like Brandon and Manolo and Daniel was in there on this, and Ivan Markov on SDBG is doing a great job. So yeah, it's really, I did it just a few things last year. I don't think I was all that productive.
You're so modest, Brian.
Okay, let's have the next question from here.
Yeah, so this is backing up slightly to, can we do breaking changes? So my world is I've got two quite large GWT projects, one of which is mobile and is PhoneGap based, and I get the luxury of being WebKit based essentially all the time. And the other of which is not. It's for desktop, and it's my world. I this month retired IE8, and yeah, which is great, but not IE9, and things that don't work on IE11.
You can do that next
aren't going to cut it. So going forward in 3.0, if you make changes, if you have like a new widget that's not going to work on IE, then I can't go to 3. That doesn't mean it's a bad idea. It might be a great idea, but you'll have people who can't move, and you need to there seems to be some of the talks are very very Chrome centric. I can kind of understand why, but that's not the whole world, and it's really important to remember that.
So let me calm your mind there a little. We already had this discussion last year, and we kind of came up with a plan where we said, well, Google is not really interested in maintaining an old version of GWT really long going forward. We want to focus on the future and make sure that we're building stuff that is relevant in 5 years. But on the other hand, there are these companies like Vaadin and Sencha that have customers that really care about the long tail of things. So we kind of agree that we need a long-term support of GWT in the 2.x branch. So there's going to be a supported version. We're not going to know if it's going to be 2.8, 2.9, whether we're going to actually make the cutoff. But there's going to be a long-term supported version of GWT which you can rely on.
And the other thing is that when you start modularizing GWT, it's unlikely we're actually going to introduce any widgets at all into GWT 3.0. We're basically focused on the underlying core platform and making that strong. Compiling, debugging, testing, and interoperability. And that basically will be the changes we primarily make. And some of those can be backported to the 2.x line, which hopefully Vaadin and Sencha and those guys will help with. But it's unlikely we're going to introduce browser-based dependencies that actually break the old browsers. There's one case where the old browsers do break, and that's an IE8 issue, which is the JS interop system relies on object.define property, and it's just broken in IE8. And so but in terms of translating from Java to JavaScript, we'll always have a pathway to ECMAScript 3, which is the old browser JavaScript. And so as long as the actual support for like object.define property is there, I think you'll be okay. Then you can just pick and choose the add-on widget libraries that for whatever browser you need to be supported.
And so one thing I wanted to point out, I think that actually ArcBees and especially Julian has done a really great job when it comes to GSS and providing a smooth migration path. You guys are going to notice with 2.8, it will require you a little bit of work to upgrade to GSS, but it's probably going to be a very smooth process for you. And I think these kinds of, we require you to do something with the next release in order to get to a saner state. I think that's not a bad thing to do.
No, I'm okay with that. And we use a bunch of stuff that was introduced long after we started in GWT 1.4, and there's a whole bunch of changes since then. And we've been tracking it. We're running 2.6. We're 2.7 yesterday. So, we're keeping track, but 3 is not going to work as far as I can see in the short term.
Yeah, but there's also this thing that like with GWT, it's technically quite okay to stay at an old version. I mean, compared to like a browser. If you use a 1-year-old browser, you have like tons of security holes that will get you into problem immediately. But then GWT is not like in that way doing things that need updating all the time. Okay, you miss out on some of the new features maybe, but like bug fixes can still be backported, and in that way it's like it's a quite good situation, even though there are like newer versions out there.
Yeah, and like if the compiler is basically separated from the SDK portion, so for example, you could get the latest benefits of the GWT 3.0 compiler, but maybe you're still tracking an old widget library, for example, and so it has many benefits. We can iterate on certain pieces much faster, so you don't have to wait for a 6-month or a yearly release for some fix. You can basically just go get the newest compiler if it fixes some bug, or you can go get the newest library here. You don't have to wait for all the pieces to be held up for some big numeric bump in the thing. But I would like to say that I think the most likely breakages are going to be around splitting things up and removing the old dev mode. So even if you use super dev mode today, you're probably using GWT test case. And GWT test case is implicitly using dev mode. And that's basically highly likely to go away in GWT 3.0. And so at the very least, you're going to have to basically modify your build rules to launch your test cases using some new technique that runs them in a browser.
Okay, let's take the next question.
Okay, so I think you could argue that super dev mode, in a way, in this last year, has saved GWT. That it has, made it much easier to argue to your JavaScript programming colleagues that they should, give GWT serious consideration. I think it was a real, the compile time issues were a big barrier to adoption, and I'm really thrilled that it was tackled in the last year. It certainly made my life a lot easier. So, but I feel like, it's still, we have this roughly the same number of attendees at the GWT conference.
No, we are growing by 2%.
We have two more. Great. But my prediction is that we're still going to be in this steady state for a while, because I feel like there's one more big barrier to adoption, and that is compatibility with the latest DOM APIs. It's what makes me envious of my JavaScript programming peers. And I know we're all aware of this, and there's plans for Elemental 2.0, which itself is dependent on JS interop. But I just want to really encourage the GWT team to really put serious attention on this, like super dev mode, because I think my prediction is that a year from now we're going to be here and we're going to say, my God, JS interop and Elemental 2.0, they saved GWT again. And after those, I think after we take care of that, on top of super dev mode, that we're going to start seeing some pretty exciting growth as people see that they can basically do everything they're doing right now and take advantage of all the latest JavaScript APIs. I think it's going to be a really exciting time, but I think it's going to require serious focus to get to that point. Can you guys comment?
I mean, I think your comment is validated by a Hacker News thread the other day, where there was a guy in there basically saying he really loves to use GWT, and that started a flame war, and basically the responses of other people were like, yeah, I used to use GWT, but I got frustrated because I couldn't use like the WebRTC API.
Right, exactly.
And I couldn't use, and so like, they were building like, bleeding edge modern web applications, and they essentially would have to write their own wrappers for everything. Right. And if it's between that and let me just download Angular or Polymer or one of these other libraries, and out of the box, it just does what I want, or I can just go grab some like WebRTC chat widget.js and drop it in. They're just going to do that. It's going to take you like a half hour to do it, and so you'll just do that instead. And so we really need JS interop to basically lower that barrier to zero, I think.
And I think it's the people who are on the bleeding edge who really want those new APIs, who are also the most vocal. And so, if we can get their attention and show them how they can be using bleeding edge, I think we're going to see, a change in tide in the kind of dialogue that we're hearing out there.
Yeah, I mean, we frequently hear things like, "Isn't GWT dead?" Right? Because if you go on Stack Exchange or any of these kind of like hipster websites where the developers are all the bleeding edge developers, they'll say like, well, okay, AngularJS has 40,000 users or something, right? Or EmberJS has 20,000. No one says that as far as we can tell, we have at least 100,000 monthly active developers on GWT. And so why is that? That's because you guys are developing the apps that keep the world running. They're running inside people's banks. They're running inside healthcare. They're running inside their corporations and inside inventory management systems and things like that. But you guys are not. Your apps are a lot of times not public. They're internal. They're invisible, and you're not out bragging about them on Reddit. And so all people see every day is, well, look at this cool little fancy tiny app I've done with Angular, and it only took me 2 days, and it just looks so great, and it's kind of sexy, and it's selling towards people. And so one problem is GWT doesn't have visibility. It's relatively invisible, our user base. And so you're absolutely right. Like, it is the bleeding edge people, the people who are writing apps often that don't have mission critical reliance on them, who are actually the people who are evangelizing and selling the web platform where it's going to be 5 years from now. And so we do need to address that market.
Also, if I may comment on that, if you kind of, I think in order to grow, you need new persons to adopt GWT, right? And if you go to GWTproject.org and start reading about GWT, you actually see a lot of stuff that most of us consider to be outdated. I mean, they are part of the framework, and these are the things that these guys see first. I mean, there are super cool apps written with GWT, like Inbox. And I guess Inbox is not using too much of that stuff that is old and outdated. So if you could just kind of leave that stuff behind, let's say on GWT Classic or 2.x, that would actually make GWT quite a bit more sexy.
I could code up a CL pretty fast.
Sorry?
I could pull out a patch pretty fast to do that.
So, David.
By the way,
Yeah.
David is, you should maybe introduce yourself.
No, for this question, I don't want to introduce myself.
Sorry.
This question is intended to be a softball for the Googlers with just a bit of ornery. In the last couple of years, Google has introduced a couple of shiny new ways to build web applications for the future, potentially replacing GWT. And so my question is very clever. It is, between Angular and Dart, which has more momentum?
No comment.
I'll take that. So, we are not on the Dart team, so I can't say anything about Dart. And I'm not on the Angular team either, so I can't really say anything about Angular. But
All right, why don't you stop there, and it'll save your job and your political capital within the company.
No, so we can, but I can tell you this. We have a really good story with GWT that we were able to sell on Gmail, being able to share code across platforms. Maybe you can do the same thing with Dart, but I'm having a hard time imagining that, because there's no Dart VM on Android, and there's certainly no Dart VM on iOS.
Or Chrome.
Or Chrome, for that matter. Thank you.
You're fired.
Yeah, there are things I can say. Yeah.
And we've seen that many people inside of Google like this kind of story of sharing code between applications. And Tom Ball, in his J2 Objective-C presentation, made it pretty clear that it's actually important to Google's brand to be able to ship these features across all these different platforms at the same time. So you can kind of imagine all the important flagship applications have to come up with a way of doing that. And code sharing is a very good of ensuring that you're actually doing the same thing on every of these platforms. So I think as long as we have these new customers, we as the GWT team are just fine.
So I have a relatively diplomatic way to answer that. That's not.
I think I answered that very diplomatic.
Well, I have another take on it, which is it's easy for things to seem like they have a lot of momentum when they start small. So GWT's been around since 2006. It's a relatively mature market. We have 100,000 developers. If you start off with like 500 developers, and the next month you've got 1,000, and 6 months later you've got 2,000, and so on. And from an outsider's point of view, you're looking at it, it looks like an exponential curve. It looks like, oh man, this is where we need to be. Everyone's going there. But we know exponential curves don't last forever. They eventually turn into S curves. And so the question is, where is the S going to happen? Where's the inflection point? And so one way to answer that is it's hard to judge momentum because you don't know where the inflection point is going to be. So it could be that they do have more momentum. It could be they do have less. But one thing is to say is don't take initial small growth and extrapolate it, forever. So we don't know. We ultimately don't know what's going to be the next web programming platform. Hopefully, GWT is in the mix.
Yeah, I think in terms of internal usage of GWT, we're still the big daddy, and all the others have these growth, but they're not nearly near the actual numbers we got currently. So we're good.
At least as far as Google's concerned, there's been more apps written in GWT in the last 2 years than there has previously been in the others. I mean, a lot of the new stuff has been launched, not just Inbox, not just Sheets, which was last year. Google Shopping Express, if you live in the Bay Area, if you go to that store and you order stuff and it gets delivered to you in a couple hours, that's a GWT app. There's lots of others, and there's a couple of more coming up that I can't talk about yet. Maybe next year, GWT.create, we'll be talking about those. But so the uptake is it's still growing. It's not leveled off, and so that's basically all I can say about momentum.
That's all great to hear. I would just like to point out, however, that Angular has cleverly positioned itself to benefit from the law of conservation of angular momentum.
I will refrain from saying anything.
Next question, please.
Yeah, I think just first off, I just wanted to say thank you to most of the people in this room for delivering a solution that we can trust. I'm sure most people in this room remember what it was like to develop a web application for a variety of different browsers just a few years ago. So I think it's really exciting about the trust that we've built by being able to use the GWT compiler to produce technical solutions that are going to be consistent across a variety of platforms. So one thing that I am kind of curious about, and I think this panel would be able to answer some of those things, would be that everybody has their unique ideas on branding. And I'm curious, especially in larger organizations, what types of modules do you think we could add on in the future, or technical resources we could add on in the future to share technical resources to implement that design and brand across a variety of unique GWT applications?
Lots of glancing around. I don't think anybody.
Maybe restate the question a little slightly.
Sure.
I'm not sure I totally understood the.
Sure. So most larger corporations are going to have design standards and branding standards and things like that, where here's how typical menus are going to look. Here's how the next new style is going to look, i.e. material design. What is being done within your organizations to provide technical resources, i.e. reusable styles and reusable widgets across all of your different divisions inside the company?
I see what you're saying. Well, for Google internally, I can tell you at a high level what we do. We'll produce a new design standard, like material design. 2 or 3 years ago, we actually had an interim design where we redesigned all the Google sites, and so all of a sudden everyone had to retool for those look and feel. And so we have multiple technologies within Google. We have GWT. We didn't have Dart during that era, but we had Closure Compiler, and there are other things that people use to write apps. And so people had to reproduce all of these designs, these high-level designs, in all 3 systems. And so that's happening kind of today with material design. So material design covers all platforms, and so people are doing it with Android, they're doing it, Google has, even for iOS, we have material design. We have it for Polymer. And so now it's our job to actually, for somebody, not just, it doesn't have to be Google, but it's our job to actually produce that for somebody. Angular actually has produced a material design, and I think there's even a React version of material design. So to some extent, Google has already kind of produced a design standard, which everyone can kind of download and adhere to. The only problem I have with that is not everyone wants everything to look like material design, right? And so I kind of shy away from having one overall recommended user interface design for that reason. I think better is actually to have technical standards for the implementation of how these things are implemented, in terms of not just code style, but the preferred mechanism by which these things are normally implemented. For example, Daniel will be familiar with this, the appearance pattern for designing widgets, right? That actually was a really good idea that pays off dividends down the road. And so if we had that for other parts of GWT going forward, what's the ideal way to make a web component with GWT? There probably is a good design solution for that, and everyone doesn't have to roll their own. And then if someone just said, and we agreed upon there's a good way to do it, then everyone who then goes and implements their own widget will kind of adapt to the same pattern. And so that's my train of thought.
We have been actually kind of trying to solve the same problem for Vaadin for some time, and we have been introducing this Valo theme for Vaadin. Maybe somebody is interested in actually porting that to all GWT widgets, and it could be usable together with GWT.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have a quite consistent and good design on your site. Do you actually, if someone wants to contribute a Vaadin widget, do you guys actually have a spec to basically make it consistent with the rest of the Vaadin?
Yes. So the theme engine is such that you give it a set of parameters, like 10, 15 parameters, and it compiles a consistent look for all the widgets. So maybe we can discuss this offline.
Maybe the answer is we need a theme engine.
Well, at Cincha, we do a lot of, like, I guess all of our widgets using the appearance design pattern. And I know that one of our customers is a large financial organization, and they have to do branding on a per customer basis because they create software that they have very strict requirements with button heights and stuff like that on individual customers of theirs. So using an abstraction for the view technology, taking that away from the functionality of the widget actually helps out quite a bit. And I think appearance design pattern is a good choice.
Yeah, and one more comment here is that like the visual look, like the branding or whatever phrase you want to use for it, that's technically mostly CSS. You just put some elements in the DOM, apply the styles to it. It doesn't matter from where those elements come. So you can also, in theory at least, mix and match as long as you get like the same DOM structure there with the same style sheet.
Okay, James.
All right, I got an easy one. Last year we did questions that everyone had to answer, and that was fun. So I'll give you guys an easy one. If you could get the entire community to wave your magic wand and build one thing over the next year, what would it be? The community, not you.
Vaadin, I'll answer yours. Vaadin widgets. Right.
I have no idea. Like, I actually think it's the other way around. The community creates whatever it wants to do, and then like from that, good things keep being popular, and less good things, they just like fade away. So that's actually
What's your wish for it?
Yeah, I don't have any wish. I just wish that there's lots of good stuff and that it can prosper. And I'm more excited to see like what can come because I can't come up with any good ideas right now.
I'll complain a little bit, give a suggestion. One of the big things that I tend to do in the GWT community is hang out in IRC and answer questions, and it often is the same question over and over again. And we've had some discussions this week that have been the same question several different times from different people. My leftover chunk of my split points is more than 10 megabytes. What do I do now? And I think a lot of those have sort of led me to think, as helpful as it is to be answering these questions there or on Stack Overflow or in person, not enough stuff is coming out when people say, I finished solving my problem. Let me write it up for somebody else. So if you solve a problem, please write it up. Either contribute it to the documentation, put it on your blog and link it from somewhere where we can find it, put it on Google+. The rest of us really want to hear about it.
So I had two answers, I had one answer, and what he just said actually caused me to change my answer. I was going to say, because I'm going to be assisting in landing Java 8 support soon, is that we need a lot of people basically to implement the basic JRE classes, things that will be missing, like some things that are in the Java API of 8 that you might want in the basic java.lang package hierarchy that won't necessarily be there. Because it's kind of fairly tedious to fill out the JDK like that. And so if you could just contribute like one class at a time, if you see something missing, there's like some API that's obvious, like maybe it's a Java util stream class that allows you to add up all the numbers or a map reduce or something, that would be cool. But I'm changing my answer because what you just said I think dovetails with something somebody else said earlier, maybe it was you, but you go look at our website, which, by the way, is hosted in GitHub, and anybody can basically commit a CL to change or add anything to it, is we need to delete all of the old tutorials in GWT and samples that have been there since 2006. And we need to add a bunch of new, cool-looking sample apps and tutorial articles and explaining common problems like, hey, how do you style something with GSS resource? Here's a little bit of sample code. Or how do you, display a table of data? We need basic getting started samples. And those are things that you guys have already solved those problems. And it's not very hard to do. If you could just transcribe that into a little bit of Markdown and go give us a pull request, we can pull it. If we approve the change, it gets published to the website immediately. And that would be like not just helpful to other people in this room, but it would give the appearance to people who may be potential GWT users that the project is alive and it's dynamic and they go to the website every day and there's always new content. It doesn't look like it's basically a statue. And so that's basically what I would say. Forget about the Java 8 stuff. That's actually more important for the health of the community.
Yeah, you somewhat went into what I was about to say. So there's this really hard-down technical problems like building incremental compilation, and that's mostly what we spend our time on. But there's all these other bits and pieces, and the homepage just being one of these, that are actually important. But from my point of view, Ray's or my time or John's time is spent working on these really hard technical pieces. The problem is we kind of need to get the word out about these pieces. And there's lots and lots of different things. And I've been really thankful over the last year, and I've worked with many people from the community who took up small pieces and made something really good out of them. For example, we had nobody working on the Google plugin for Eclipse, and Brandon took that up and made sure that Super Dev Mode support is now actually in GPE. It's overall, of all the stuff we did, it's a small contribution, but it makes a huge difference for you guys wanting to be able to debug and start things off from Eclipse. The same thing that happened to the website. Julian took basically the ownership of the website and spent a huge amount of time actually porting into complete clean Markdown and making that whole edit flow work with just GitHub before you actually need to set up the whole contribution process through Garrett, which was kind of cumbersome. And I'm probably forgetting, there's a couple of other people over the last year that spent a significant amount of time improving GWT code. Jens, for instance, or even Andre, who spent a lot of time looking at the emulation stuff and making things faster. So even if you think, so we had a couple of people that started off not very knowledgeable about GWT, but they started off as contributors and tried to do small things, and we kind of built them up from the ground, told them about specific things, and so they learned and kind of grew with us. So if you look at the overall of contributions, we were like 2-3 years ago, we were practically at 0. We're now fine over 25%, and we'd actually like to see this number grow even more. So that's something I would be looking for. If any of you actually want to get involved and take a small piece of something you're interested in, we'd be very happy to help you do this.
Next one, please.
And I'll probably continue the redundancy. And we'll probably have a lot of that going down the line. But volunteers are a very important part of the community. This will be especially important whenever we start to modularize and taking ownership. And I know 100% certainty that most developers, I'm one of them, that we will find a problem in the backing framework and we will create a workaround and not actually share it and contribute that back. And I think a lot of the same problems are solved over and over and over. And if we can try to contribute that a little bit more, I think that would be great.
Yeah, it makes sense. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. What the community could do, that SDBG, which is amazing, and seems to be just the one guy, but he rocks. That is really awesome. So, yeah, I'd love to see that. I mean, I'll cheat and say kind of like the other, but just like more cool, awesome things, right? I think what would help, Singular and 2 or 3 more of those, right? Like just making really awesome things that show that GWT can be, cool and awesome.
Okay, so yeah, just emphasize again that I believe that in open source, really every small contribution matters. Be it the docs or the website is not any less valuable than sending in a fix for code. And I think a good starting point is when filing an issue to actually make an attempt of fixing it and suggesting a fix when filing it. We often see, not just in GWT, obviously in everywhere in Red Hat, where people often complain about a fix not getting in, where in reality it would have been doable for them to fix it themselves. So that's often a good motivation. If fix the stuff that you run into is a good way to get into the project. And then to actually answer the question, as I'm a member of the community, what I would most likely work on would be Java 8, a JRE emulation library, because I think that's the biggest feature we need. And I'd be more than excited to help if I get any chance. So.
Yeah, for my part, I hope that, as Roy said, we will improve the documentation, because note that we have a new website. The problem is that the content of the website is still old, so we put in place a process to be able to edit the documentation very easily. So I think that in the next year you will have a lot of contribution in the documentation. And I hope also that, you know, RBs, when we need something, we build something and then we open source it. I hope that we will have a lot of new open source projects for last years. And voilà.
Yeah, well, since there's a lot that has been said about features that could be added, Java 8, for example, GS interrupt, contributions as well. You guys, if you can contribute even more, it would be awesome. But making some noise, talking about GWT, not just contributing to the documentation or just talked about GWT and what it does and what it can do, because, well, if you take the JavaScript community, they make a lot of noise, so we need to make a lot of noise as well. Aside of that, I think that there's still some work to do on the GSS side, whatever it takes to get to a point where integrator, CSS expert can really contribute efficiently to GWT and make those big corporate applications look beautiful. We can already do that, but it could be even simpler, and it can be even faster for those CSS guys to do their work.
I'll continue the trend, and I really want to echo the fact that each of you have interesting design and technical and engineering challenges that the world is missing out on by you not sharing them. And I'd like to call you to come up on stage next year and to join. It doesn't take a rock star to do something like this. This is about you, and in order for this community to grow and for people to continue, young developers to join the community, then they need to hear about what we're doing, and so I'll echo what everyone's here on the stage said, and the importance of talking about what you do, because you learn more and we all learn more from that.
So if I can kind of add my wish to list as well, I'm not part of the steering committee, submit presentations to conferences and somehow kind of sneak these in without saying that, hey, this is an introduction to GWT. Just kind of combine them with something new and exciting, reactive GWT, singular, I don't know, blob, and say that it's something exciting and new, and then sneak in GWT, and it will be exciting and new again in those conferences. But I guess we are running out of time, so...
Wait. Can we give Gaktok a chance to answer that question? Because I think he wants to...
opinion on
yes.
So,
you're the most opinionated member of our team.
So one thing I think I want to emphasize is the SDBG and the IDE tooling. It's basically the blind spot. We don't work on them, right? I mean, if you look at it, we don't maintain them and so on, and it's still used, it's still important. So it means basically we expect community to take them to the next step. For example, when we change something like the GSNI, right? The IDE starts showing if you add a feature, IDE tooling needs to follow up with that feature for highlighting and for code completion and so on. So one of the things we want from community to take on the ownership of these plugins, especially Eclipse plugins, and take them further. The second thing I would like to emphasize is, as we are doing with the JS interop and trying to be more bare metal and try to be less opinionated about it, we still need these frameworks from the community side to be opinionated on how to develop on GWT. Either it might be a new idea or just following existing ideas like the singular, or what is trendy can be, with the new JS interop, can be easily ported into GWT. And we expect people to do these ports, and so that we can enable more people in different programming styles without expecting anything from the GWT teams and the steering committee. I think that's going to be very important for community to take on in the next years.
Thank you. So that's end of the panel. Let's give an applause for the panel, as well as all the speakers who have been giving these presentations for you. So who thinks this was awesome? Who's coming again next year? Only half of you who thought that it's awesome. Thanks for coming. It has been really nice to have all you here in the conference. And let's go and hack something interesting and tell to the world that GWT is actually great and growing.